Greetings once again. We're back with video number 9 in the Rediscovering Peace series. This video is going to go more into depth on this diagram. To start off, if you haven't seen video 7 yet, it would probably be wise to do so. This video will stand alone, but you'll understand a lot more of it, a lot more in depth, if you watch video 7 first. So just hit pause, watch video 7, and then come back to me. And I'm going to assume you've done that now. Welcome back. If you have no access to video 7 for whatever reason, very briefly, what this is a cross-section, a symbolic cross-section of any given moment of your life, right? You take the totality of your life from the cosmos that surrounds you, your immediate environment, the material world immediately in your that you can immediately perceive, right? Your own body and everything going on inside of your body, all the way down to your heart, to your quote-unquote soul. If all of that were to be an orange, and you cut it in half, this is the cross-section look of that moment, of that moment of your existence in that universe, okay? So, video 7 described that in general, these 9 layers. The universe, your world, your body, your mind, your ego, right? Your true self, and then of course in here the mystery of your soul, or your conscience, or whatever that is, right? Which to this day no one knows for sure, and no one probably ever will. Yeah. So that was video 7. Video 8 dealt more in depth with the internal dynamic of this life as a sentient, moral, potentially moral being. Everything that goes on inside your mind-body, right? Namely, this dance between selfishness and selflessness, between fear and love, between ego and soul, for lack of a better term, or true self, or conscience. That we have this fog in between our mind and our heart, again for lack of a better term. And every time I reference this, it's fuzzy science. Science is catching up. You can Google heart-brain, heart math. We're starting to figure out more of this connection between soul and heart and consciousness. We're still a long ways off. But there's this fog that is based in and was constructed by the leftover residue from past selfish choices. Choices that we made reasonably in response to pain or fear or sadness or anger, starting from our birth all the way up until yesterday, or just a few minutes ago or whatever, yeah? Every time we chose to act selfishly or self-centeredly or sinfully, sin just meaning miss the mark, not that you're a bad person or anything. Anytime you acted for self, it left this residue which fortified your sense of separateness, which fortified your sense of self-justification, of living for self, of rationalizing your self-survival, right? And of course, every time you made one of those choices, this fog got a little thicker. Now, fears are relatively, it's pervasive, and we're programmed to be fearful always, first and foremost, and most of our choices by far are fear-based, and indeed our entire society, if you look at it close enough, is primarily constructed in response to fear. And yet it's a relatively weak frequency, so even the fog has become quite thick merely because we have engaged in such choices millions of times in our lives up to now. Every time we do so in the present, a little bit more residue is left, making this sludge and fog a little denser. And yet every time we choose to almost irrationally love anyway, it's such a stronger impetus that it sheds an exponentially greater amount of that sludge away. And this is the dance going on inside of you in every moment. Do you follow the impetus of the ego and just take care of yourself and make your sense of isolation from your surroundings and emotional distance from those around you thicker? Or do you choose to transcend that finally, and in the moments you least wish to do so, possibly even for those least deserving of the same, you love anyway, which is an incredibly powerful experience that reunifies you with your true self and with the true selves of others, which then makes this fog much, much thinner and increases the likelihood that you'll make a similar choice in the future. So this is your internal dynamic we discussed in video 8. This video deals with a similar dance we do outside of our bodies. This is the external dynamic. Some folks like to call this happenstance. Some like to call it synchronicity, right? How we interact, how we notice what we notice in our surroundings, and then how we interact with the same. And as with anything else, there's a choice to be made here as well. Not only internally, with what's going on inside of us, but how we respond to what we notice and perceive in our surroundings. There's also a choice to be made. To preface this, it's important to remember that this fog not only is continually encouraging us to be selfish, it's also continually setting up a barrier of perception that has us tend not to notice things that are familiar. All the thousands of bits of information that are flooding to us, right? The blackness of this plastic case, and how I'm sitting, and where the room I'm in, and etc., etc. Yeah? It's all flooding into us, and this fog helps our brains take the vast majority of those stimuli and categorize them as familiar, essentially non-dangerous, right? And lets us focus instead on the very, very few, one or two, that we wish to focus upon, right? And this is happening in every moment of our lives unless we pause and really look at what we're looking at, or really pay attention to where we are and how we are, where we are. We tend not to notice the vast majority of what we are subconsciously perceiving because it's all safe. We've felt it before, we've been there before, we're in the routine, we don't have to pay attention. Yeah. Now, continually what happens, or I should say not continually, but often and repeatedly what happens is experiences occur that we don't have a reference point for, that we haven't yet categorized. The amazingly bad and the amazingly good. The amazingly good and the amazingly evil. The tragic and the wondrous. These things happen to us where we go, oh my goodness, and that I've never seen anything like that before. I've never felt anything like that before. And then we attend to it. What happens? There's nothing in this fog here that can immediately categorize it as normal, and so the perception flies in and is perceived, and we have to choose what to do with it. Okay? Now the ego would have us choose to categorize these occurrences as quickly as possible, understand them as quickly as possible, deal with them as quickly as possible to our own advantage, and then move on. Right? If you see the wondrous, pause and just soak it in. Just soak it up and feel good and warm inside and say, boy, that was awesome. I'm going to remember that someday. I'm going to keep that as a memory so I can keep referencing this on days when I'm feeling down. That double rainbow in the sky, right? That the bald eagle is flying through. Okay, that's just, whoa! I'm going to remember that forever. It's fine to do that. Who would ever forget a bald eagle soaring through a double rainbow? Of course not. But the point is, the reason why we're attending to it from the ego's point of view is for our own benefit in the future. Similarly, if something horrible happens, right, we respond to it by analyzing it, making sure it's not going to affect us or our friends or family, and then either dealing with it, fighting it, or running away from it. Right? That's how we do with the amazingly horrific things that happen in our lives, or the evil people in our lives, right? When an evil person is in your life, you analyze them, you judge them, you condemn them, and then either you set up healthy boundaries or you attack them in return. Or you run away. Right? And what this video is going to broach is the equally available alternative to experiencing the amazing, be it amazingly discomfortable, I don't think that's a word, but I'm just going to keep it, and or the amazingly disconcerting, and or the amazingly wondrous and wonderful, right? As opposed to processing them for self, or rejecting them to protect self, we are allowed to use them as guides. We're allowed to use them as guides. And that's what pages 32 and 33 of the workbook, which this video covers, are about. Here's the workbook. If you go to my website, which is linked in the description box, you can go to the writings page, and you can either read the workbook online, or you can download it in PDF form and have your own copy in your hand. But we're on page 32 and 33. And for each of these archetypes that we've mentioned, the archetypes of these virtues, which have a similarly archetyped sin, also have a similarly archetyped set of beacons, amazing happenstances that come to us, that we notice, that we can either selfishly process, as I just mentioned, or use as guides. Everything amazingly wonderful that happens to us, we can say, I can do that too. I can further that as well. Right? I can emulate that. That's amazing. I can emulate that and be that for someone else. Similarly, everything evil that happens, as opposed to judging it, criticizing it, shunning it, pushing it away, and thereby making it worse, which we'll talk about in one of the next set of videos, we can say, wow, that's a poor decision that person made. Thank heavens there were compassion for that poor decision. Thank them for reminding me not to be that way. Right? And so what I've called these on page 33 are noble beacons, which are the amazingly wondrous things that regularly come to us, that remind us how to be, how to return to who we truly are in the way we act, or in the ignoble warnings. I don't even know how to pronounce that word. Is the G pronounced an ignoble? Ignoble? Ignoble, I think it's not. Ignoble warnings, right? Evil. Badness, yeah? These are the horrible things that we witness that can remind us how not to be. And so, as opposed to reacting to life selfishly, we can take what comes to us from without and we can use it in order to further, to reawaken us to become powerful forces for harmony. More powerful and more aware, more conscious forces for harmony in our surroundings. So I have a few examples of this written on page 33. And I'll go through them by archetype, and then this video will essentially be done. This is kind of a short and sweet one. It's just a more advanced is kind of a judgmental term. It's a more awakened or a more practical. It's a more practical and powerful way to look at the concept of synchronicity. As opposed to saying, oh my God, that's amazing, look at that synchronicity, and maybe trying to find a message in it for you, for yourself, you can say, right on. That's how I should be, and or that's, thank heavens I saw that to remind me not to be like that. Yeah. Kind of a true self reawakener. So, with regards to the black archetype, which is acceptance or forgiveness, there are two things. We can see the amazingly wondrous, which is whenever we see someone being radically kind to an enemy, right? Our ego wants to say, whoa, that's dangerous and everything, and yet deep down, when we see that kind of noble action, we get the warm glow right in here, and we are reminded that we too can do that. On the flip side, whenever we see, for example, a preacher standing up before his congregation, and they are asking for his forgiveness, and he says, no, you're damned to hell, from his position of power and ignorance, dare I say, causing them immense pain and suffering, manipulating them thereby, that is the opposite of good. That is a form of evil, and we can be reminded that even if we are certain that we're right, exuding zealotry towards others and judging them negatively thereby, and thereby causing them suffering is not something we want to do. That doesn't bear any good fruit. It's a waste of that opportunity. That's how we're not supposed to be. Moving to the red archetype, which is divine patience, which again is not waiting for something great to happen. It's the opposite. It's detached motion, detached action, right? On the one side, we really admire when we see someone in the face of great danger remain very calm and just respond, right? That you can tell that even if they're afraid, they just take a deep breath and you can just see them just respond in the face of great danger. That's how we all can be as well. And on the flip side, when we see people manipulating or confining the powerless, it's a great case in point for patience is if you watch any of the videos of factory farms, right? I mean, we all know that animals are sentient, that they suffer, and that they shouldn't be abused. I mean, people who abuse cats and dogs are frowned upon heavily in most societies for reasons, right? You can't go much lower on the moral scale as far as societal acceptance or rejection is concerned than animal abuser. And so when we see someone for personal profit confining and abusing the powerless, right, that's the opposite. That tells us that it is something we never ever want to do, is use our position of power to inflict a confinement upon another, right, the freedom of another. And that reminds us not to do that and not to support that. The orange archetype is the generosity archetype. Here we have the widow's mite, right? The famous tale where the most powerful giving is when the poor woman gives everything she had. She gave it to the church at the time. The young, it wasn't really a church at the time. There was no church until after Jesus passed. And yet she did put it into the tithing bowl of the Jewish temple, I believe. And possibly not the best of choices, not the wisest of moves for the efficient use of that money. And yet the point is, she gave wholeheartedly all that she had, and she had very, very little. And so when we see someone poor being generous, we're all inspired by that. That's a noble deed, and that warms us all to see a poor person giving selflessly to others in need. Similarly, on the flip side, we are just as disgusted when we see a wealthy man in a three-piece suit walk by and sneer at a homeless person and tell him to get a job. Right? That's the opposite of the orange archetype. That's showing us exactly how we are not supposed to be. And then instead of condemning that rich man, we can have compassion for his ignorance, and we can subtly thank him for reminding us that it's our opportunity, our blessed opportunity, to then go to that same homeless person and offer what little we can, right? And it was the scorn of that greed-based, selfish rich man that awoke that in us, that was provided the beacon for that awakening. We can be thankful for that. As far as the yellow archetype goes, gratitude. On the positive side, we really admire situations where we see people being thankful for their lives despite great difficulty. How many times do you watch reports on tornadoes, and they interview the people often who have lost their homes in tornadoes on the news? The news loves the dirty laundry and loves to show us other people's suffering. So turn it off, by the way. The news is not a good thing. And yet, if you are watching the news and there has been a tornado and you do see a video interview of one of the victims who has lost his or her house, invariably you'll see someone say, I'm just thankful so few were hurt, or I'm thankful my family's alive, or I'm thankful I found my dog. And so you see gratitude in the face of disaster, and this is inspiring. It's inspiring to us. It's inspiring for a reason, because we are reminded that we too, in our darkest times, can choose gratitude as opposed over mourning, right? And on the flip side of that, it's just annoying as all get out to us instinctively when we see people who have it really, really good whining about the minor stuff. And I sometimes count as one of those people. I think we all do in the West. We have it all pretty darn good, and yet we get so comfortable and so familiar with that greatness and this amazing life we've all been blessed to live, where we can just go down to the grocery store to get food, for example, whenever. And then when we find ourselves whining about really petty, relatively petty things. Now, I don't want to discount that, because we all have our set of challenges. Relativity is what it is. And at the same time, when we witness someone doing that in an extreme way, we can either judge them as being an ingrate, or we can have compassion for them and be thankful for them for reminding us to not fall into the same trap, right? The green archetype is compassion again, and here it's in our society we're taught and our brains are programmed that everything unfamiliar is dangerous until proven otherwise, which is why we have such a difficult time dealing well with strangers. So when you see someone being kind to a stranger, overtly kind to a stranger, it just busts through here. It busts through this wall of familiarity. It's anything but familiar. Not just over here in Germany, where it's very unusual to see people being kind to strangers, but even in America, which is a relatively gregarious culture, even then, it's unusual. And so anybody who witnesses that will immediately think that's unusual and notice it and be reminded, like, hey, right on, we are all family. I can be kind to strangers too. And on the flip side, of course, you have bigotry and hate crimes, is the opposite of compassion. Or people who, in the face of great tragedy, walk by and obviously have chosen really not to care and just turn their nose up at tragedy and don't even give 1 ounce of empathy to those who are suffering right next to them, right? Again, nothing to be rejected or criticized or condemned. These are beacons, these are gifts these people are giving us to remind us that there but for the grace of God, there but for our ability to choose otherwise, we too will be. We have to remember consistently not to be this way, and they're helping to remind us. The honesty archetype is blue. Here we really admire, it happens very rarely, but if someone is ever not confused, well, more importantly, when someone is ever put on trial, let's say, if someone is ever accused of doing something, or they're being insulted, or they have been reprimanded, right? And as opposed to defending themselves emotionally, which is the natural response, right? No one wants to be thrown out of the herd, and so we tend to justify ourselves and explain ourselves and rationalize our behaviors and prove that what we did was right. Every now and then you'll see someone who very calmly smiles and remains silent, right? And refuses to engage in the dysfunction, refuses to recognize the improper accusation. And that's incredibly noble, and it inspires that we too can be that sure, that our lives too cannot be about us and how others view us, but it can just be about doing what good there is to be done, regardless of what anybody else thinks about it, or us. And on the flip side of that, we of course get gossip, backstabbing, manipulative betrayal. These things happen, unfortunately, all too often, and it's very tempting for us to condemn the instances of that where we see it, and yet we can also have compassion for those making that mistake and thank them for reminding us to defend those who are being gossiped about, to have the courage and the nobility and the decency not to backstab or betray, right? The humility archetype is indigo. This is this one here. Every now and then you'll see someone perform a great deed or fulfill a really fantastic accomplishment, and they will quite sincerely defer praise. The praise will come and they'll say, I couldn't have done it without. And they'll list all these other people. Or they'll say, I was incredibly fortunate to have been put in the position to do that at all. Or there's so many other people who have tried and have not had the good fortune I did to succeed. Anyway, you're deferring praise specifically onto others or away from self, when it's very tempting, of course, just to become arrogant and bask in the glory, right? That's what our ego wants, bask in the glory. Look at all these people that love me and what I've done, right? And it's very profoundly powerful to, in those instances, remember that without others, nothing is accomplished, without a great many others. And even though you might be the front man or the front woman to a success, without dozens of others, your success would have never come to fruition. And it's good to recognize that every success, no matter how isolated it seems, is a team effort. And that's very inspiring and reminds us all to do similarly, or that we can do similarly when others try to glorify us. And of course, on the flip side of that, you have a lot of folks who walk around with their nose in the air and think that they're the grace, but for the grace of God, but for their grace, you would be nothing. And really take their mid-level efforts and raise themselves onto a pedestal. And this we find instinctively annoying for a reason. It's just patently false, and it's disgusting is a little strong word, but it's annoying, and it's disturbing. And rather than condemn it, which is what the ego would have us do, right, and reject those people and criticize them, we can say, wow, compassion for you, and thank you for reminding me not to raise myself on a pedestal. Thank you for helping me to remember that I am to be a humble servant and not a collector of glory, right? Or compliment, or fame, or influence, or power, or whatever, status. The purple archetype is wonderment, and some of the things that we witness there on the positive side. The best one is one we can all do with regularity. Every now and then you'll find someone in your life who is just so happy over normal things, or just laughs beautifully and uncontrollably and deeply and sincerely over the simplest of joys, right? Or someone who stops and points something beautiful out and is staring at something so intently, or tears well up in their eyes because they've noticed something beautiful that you've completely discounted. And that reminds us to see the beauty anyway. And on the flip side, there are people, a lot of folks, who when you point the wondrous out to them, scoff at you. Oh, that's just A. One time I was in Germany, this was many years ago, I remember this vividly. I was walking down the street, and there was actually a double rainbow in Germany over Feuerbach, where I live now. Now, if you live in the state of Hawaii, like I did, you get your double rainbows about once a week. And after a while, you're just like, oh, it's another one. You know, it's that familiarity curse again, right? As opposed to pausing and seeing it as though it's the first and appreciating it as though it's the last you'll ever see. But in Germany, it is pretty darn miraculous to get a rainbow of any kind, much less a double rainbow. And there it was, the whole sky, and I was on my way to the baker. I remember exactly where I was. I remember the street I was on. And an elderly gentleman was walking in the opposite direction, and he hadn't seen it. And I said, oh, I told him in German. I pointed up, and I said, look at that. Isn't that amazing? And he looked at it for a second. He looked at me, and he kind of just went, huh, and just kept walking. Now, at the time when I hadn't been practicing all of this, I just thought, geez, what an ignorant man, right? And I might have had a tinge of sadness. I wasn't really annoyed, but I remember being a tinge sad and puzzled as to how he couldn't find that to be phenomenal. The more enlightened response, of course, the Zone 3 response, the veil-piercing response, would have been for me to pause for a moment, exude compassion for him, and thank him for reminding me to revel an extra minute of time in that rainbow, to maybe find somebody else to point it out to, and do them the service of letting them reawaken to the beauty of life and living. Right? And finally, we have faith, the white archetype, and along with pilgrimage, which is in and of itself a faith-filled journey, if one does not do it for oneself. If you're taking a pilgrimage to find inner peace, or to get redemption for your sins, that's not really what we're talking about. But if you take a pilgrimage to walk forth into the wilderness, to know life on a deeper plane and bring love to whoever you encounter along the way, and then bring that wisdom back into your life when you return, pilgrimage is a great way, and pilgrims inspire our appreciation of faith. The fact that, hey, wow, look at that. Look at that person who's leapt out into the world. I can too, right? Another way is every now and then, far too rarely, but hopefully, well, not hopefully, but it's possible that this will grow, this response, seeing the good in others anyway. And this kind of ties in with the whole gossip response, that if you see somebody being spoken negatively, it is a beautiful, beautiful act. This happened, someone did this with me just yesterday, and I responded this way. I was like, wow, I thought, wow, thank you for reminding me of who I can be. We were speaking about someone who was treating his workers quite unjustly and unfairly, and how disturbing that was, that this good person was being so disdainful to his employees. And this woman saw the goodness in him anyway, and pointed out that yes, and yet, right? This is what he did for me, and this is the goodness that shone through from him to me, and he is a good soul, right? And so I was immediately able to say, wow, not only yes, but at the same time I was able to be reminded, because we all forget. It doesn't matter how long you dance this dance. As long as you have a functioning reptile brain, you're going to forget. You're going to slip back into self-centeredness and old behavior patterns and analysis patterns. And I was reminded and was able to say, thank you. Thank you for reminding me what faith is about in others, that despite behaviors, I can see through to the innate potential waiting to blossom goodness in them too. And on the flip side, of course, we have paranoia. And this is readily witnessable all around us. It's this hyper-seeking of safety, often couched in religious dogma or getting immersed in political discussion or politics, right? That's also this, it's extremely anti-faithful, right? You're not actively, you don't have faith in yourself to do good in your community, or to rebuild your community, or to interact powerfully with others. And so you just sink into politics and let the politicians do it. Or you go to church and pray that God will do it. And so, really, when we see that, there's no need to condemn it, right? And yet what we can say is, thank you for reminding me that I don't need to do that. I can build up my community. I can be a powerful force for good. I can leap onto the path of selfless kindness, right? And so, so that kind of fleshes out the diagram then. So you see at all times, you have the merchant looking for the priceless pearl and speaking with us. Our environment is speaking with us if we just choose to pay attention and be reminded by it. And at the same time, we have the great treasure within that we can choose to rediscover if but we choose to act accordingly, lovingly, generously, with gratitude, with compassion, with honesty, right? With humility, with wonderment, with faith, right? And then return to this beautiful bliss that happens whenever there is unity between our surroundings, our souls, and what our bodies do in and with the same. Okay? All right. Feel good about that. Think it went well. Check it out, and I'll be back with you with video 10. Is that right? God, we're already up to video 10. Outstanding. Video 10A will be up in a moment. Love you guys. Peace out.